Thank you so much for that gracious introduction. Thank you to all of you for giving me an hour or so of your time. And special thanks to the Acton Institute and the Mackinac Center. Those of you, I guess all of you living in Michigan, it's probably pretty easy to take for granted the important work that they do. You just happen to have two of the most effective think tanks in America right here. Some of you are supporters of these fine organizations. Some of you made this beautiful space possible, and I congratulate you on your wisdom. I congratulate you on your commitment to making a better country. I can assure you that in Washington, D.C., we understand what's going on here in Michigan. It's a real ray of hope for us, and it's made possible by Acton and Mackinac, and indirectly, therefore, it's made possible because of you. So thank you for supporting these fine organizations. I want to talk to you today. As you just heard, I'm going to talk to you today about happiness, but I want to start my discussion with a kind of a puzzle. If you listened to the State of the Union address last week, and you listened carefully, but not even that carefully, you would have heard President Obama telling you that the main problem that our country faces, the crisis that we face, is income inequality. And you've heard it over and over again that the rich need to pay their fair share, and a lot of you are political conservatives and you don't like that ideology, but you know that he honestly believes that this is the crisis that we face. And if you listen to Republican politicians, including in the responses from the Republican Party and from the Tea Party and any other party that got airtime, you'll see that that's actually, that they disagree that it's income inequality, but they had other crises that they were worried about. They were worried about the crisis of economic growth, that growth is too low in this country. Now, we've had this battle going on for years, decades as a matter of fact. Is the problem that the rich are richer than the poor, or that not everybody's rich enough? And what I want to tell you today is that's actually not the real crisis. Neither one of these things is the real crisis. Let me tell you what the real crisis that people don't see that's going on in this country is. It's a crisis of satisfaction. See, for years and years and years, public polling organizations have asked people how satisfied they are with their lives and how satisfied people are with the United States. And let me tell you what we found. Going back to 1991, since 1991, the percentage of Americans that are unsatisfied with their lives has increased by 2/3. Here's the one that really alarms me that the president ought to be paying attention to. Are you satisfied or dissatisfied with the United States, your own country? Now, look, we all have partisan ideas, and there are Republicans and Democrats, and we disagree with the other side, whatever the other side happens to be. But are you dissatisfied with America? 1991, 48% said yes, they're dissatisfied with America, which is catastrophic, by the way. Today, 75% of Americans are dissatisfied with their own country. That's the crisis. That's the real crisis. When you live in the greatest country in the history of the world with respect to prosperity, with respect to opportunity, with respect to dignity, and 75% are dissatisfied with it, you have a big problem on your hands, and that's where we sit. So I gotta ask myself, 75% of Americans of all stripes are dissatisfied with America, and we're the most prosperous country that ever existed, and we're getting more prosperous. Look, I know the Great Recession is terrible, but every income class since we were kids has prospered. What's going on where every decade we get richer and every decade we get unhappier with our country? We got to sort this out. Leaders need to sort this out. Citizens need to sort this out. Where do we start? I've been puzzling over this for a long time. And about a year ago, I was making my annual trek to India. I go to India a lot for my work. The American Enterprise Institute, where I serve as president, we have a big India practice. And it's my favorite place to go, quite frankly. It's so interesting. I love the people. I like the food. I love going to India. And I was going, my trip in 2013, I was puzzling over this problem, and one of my friends said, "Oh, you know who you need to talk to about this puzzle of dissatisfaction in the face of prosperity?" He said, "No." He said, "Well, so I have this friend. His name is Swami Gyan Muni. Swami. You got to go talk to the Swami." I said, "Well, that's new for me." He works at a place called the Akshardham Temple, which is a famous temple in Delhi. It's a beautiful place. It took 10,000 stone-cutting artisans 7 years working full-time to carve this temple. It's a wonder of the modern world. And so I went to see the Swami because people told me he has a lot of wisdom and he can help you understand this problem. And I'm open to anything, right? Because look, this is not solved, so let's get some new ideas. So I was at the temple waiting for the Swami. It was a hot May day. Sunny, and I saw the Swami coming toward me, flowing saffron robes, shaved head, and he was coming toward me. I was thinking, how am I going to communicate with him? I mean, he probably speaks English, but does he speak English well? Is it going to be a hard conversation? And he gets about 3 yards away, and he looks at me and says, "How you doing?" And I said, "Where are you from?" And he said, "Texas." And I said, okay, I got to know your story. And he says, "Oh, yeah, well, my parents immigrated from India. They were petroleum engineers, and I was born in Houston," he said. "And how'd you wind up back here?" He said, "Oh, it's a circuitous route." He says, "I did great in school. I graduated from high school when I was 16, went to the University of Texas." And then he showed me his orange robes and said, "Hook 'em horns," right? He said he graduated in 3 years from college, Summa, got his MBA. By this time, he's only 21 years old, and he's starting his career. He went to work for McKinsey Consulting, high-paying job, climbing the corporate ladder. He thought he was going to make partner, maybe CEO. He was really on a rocket ship because he's such a smart guy, and he was such a good student, and he was doing good work, working 16-hour days like all those guys do. And I said, "So what happened?" He said, "I woke up on my 26th birthday, and I said, is this it? Is this all there is? I'm not satisfied." So he went on a quest of discovery. And he wound up, through a lot of prayer and a lot of consideration, he renounced everything. He sold everything he had. He went back to India, the land of his parents' birth, and he joined a seminary. He went to a Hindu seminary, and 6 years later, he emerged a monk, a sadhu in the Hindi language. Later, he was made a Swami, because now he's my age today. And that's how he got where he is. And now I had come to him to ask him a specific question. And let's remember the question. What's your view of prosperity? Is prosperity good or is it bad? Because people are dissatisfied. How do we sort this out? And I'm getting real nervous now because I'm talking to a guy who owns nothing and who gave it all up, who was getting rich and then he gave it all up. So I know what he's going to tell me. He's going to say prosperity, it's a fool's errand. Money's a joke. Don't be fooled. I know he's going to tell me this, but I ask him anyway. He said, "Swami, what's your view on prosperity? What's your view on capitalism?" And you know what he said? He said, "It's great. It's pulled millions of people out of poverty in my country." But now I'm really confused. I said, "Yeah, but you own nothing." He actually owns 4 things: 2 robes, so he has a change of clothes, prayer beads, and a bowl for his food. Those are his 4 possessions in life. And he says he's rich. So I said, "But you own these 4 things. You've renounced everything. How can you tell me that prosperity is a good thing?" And he said, "Well, you don't understand. Money is a good thing. The problem is attachment to money." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Think about it like this. If you want a Mercedes, buy a Mercedes, but don't love it. Don't love it." And now I'm contemplating this. I'm thinking, wow, man, this is really Eastern. This is really profound. No, it's not. No, in the popular mind, the most famous quote from St. Paul is misremembered. People think of St. Paul. What did St. Paul say about money? It's the root of all evil. Wrong. St. Paul in his first letter to Timothy, "For the love of money, the attachment to money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows." He sounds like Swami Gyanmuni. And so does every single religion. The problem that we have, according to the Swami and according to St. Paul, is attachment to these things. What is attachment? What does attachment mean? Attachment has a special word, has a word in Sanskrit, in the Sanskrit language, which is the ancient language that's the basis of Hindi and Bengali and virtually all of the northern Indian languages. And the word in Sanskrit is upadana, which means the sticky craving of inadequate things, the debased substitutes for the truth that we seek. And what that effectively, you gotta love Sanskrit. It's one word that means all that stuff. I mean, it's very efficient. It's very parsimonious. It means a desperate grasping at something motivated by fear of separation from the object. It's you attach to something out of fear. That's what attachment really means. And the Swami says, that's our problem when we get rich. That's what I want to talk about. That's what I want to understand. Now, in truth, attachment happens all over life. Jealous relationships are a problem with attachment, a desperate grasping. A neurotic defense of your reputation is an attachment. Boy, do I know about neurotic defense of professional reputation. I live in Washington, D.C. I live in Washington, so you don't have to. I want you to know. Yeah, thank you. It's like I just give and give. What can I say? But the main problem that motivated me in Delhi was attachment to material things. So my first question is, why are we attached in a way that's not right, that's morally disordered to material things? Why do you love your Mercedes? And the answer is, you have disordered goals. How do I know that? Well, I'm going to move from Delhi now. I've been kind of in the temple for a long time. I'm going to go to the university. I'm going to go to the University of Rochester now. I'm going to give you the answer. University of Rochester, there are two psychologists that have been doing work on goals, on life goals. And they did a very interesting study they published in 2009 where they had been looking for years at the stated goals of graduates of the University of Rochester, and then they followed up 5 years later to see whether or not they'd met their goals and how they were doing in their lives. Okay? Now, this is an interesting study. Half men, half women. The particular sample I'm talking about is about 150 adults. And they interviewed them when they were 22 and again when they were 27. When they were 22, the researchers said, what do you want in 5 years? Just tell me your goals in 5 years. 5 years, they followed up. Did you meet your goals? How's your life going? So what did they find? To begin with, they found that there are basically only two kinds of goals. And it's about 50-50 when you look at college graduates. And they have special words for them because, when you're in academia, which I was for a long time, you have to have a lot of jargon to get tenure. So what they did was they said there are two kinds of goals, extrinsic goals and intrinsic goals. Okay? Intrinsic goals are based on relationships. About half of the people, more women than men, said that their goals in 5 years were to have a better relationship with my family, or to get married, or to know God better. These are intrinsic goals. They're relationships with someone or something that you truly love. Okay? Relationships with others. The other half had extrinsic goals. More men than women had extrinsic goals. What are they? Basically, in a nutshell, I want to get rich and famous. That's extrinsic goals. And, they didn't put it like that. I want to be doing well in my career. I want to be on the trajectory to CEO. I want to be making a lot of money. I want people to respect me. Those are extrinsic goals, 50-50. Okay. So what did they find when they brought them back after 5 years? Two things. One good, one not so good. First, the good news. You're going to hit your goals. That's basically what they found. Everybody makes their goals. It's amazing. The old adage, careful what you wish for. We now have data to back that up. Careful what you wish for because you're going to get it. The people who had intrinsic goals, I want to be married. They were mostly married. I want to have a good relationship with my family and friends. They had a good relationship with their family and friends because they were putting in the time and resources. I want to know God better. Their faith was stronger. You have intrinsic goals, you're going to meet them. If you had extrinsic goals, you were going to be on the way to getting promoted. You were going to be doing well in your career. You're going to be making a lot of money. People were going to think that you were a good employee. You're going to hit those things too. That's the good news. You want something, you're going to get it. Bad news. Careful what you wish for. First, they interviewed those that had the intrinsic goals, and what did they find? High levels of life satisfaction, high levels of contentment with what they were doing with their lives, and a real optimism about the future. Those with the extrinsic goals, what do they find? In their words, dissatisfaction with life, shame and anger, headaches, stomach aches, loss of energy. If you go after the attachment to the material things, you're going to find those material things and you're going to pay. This is a problem. This is the root of dissatisfaction in a prosperous society. And this is important because this is basically the founding ideal of the Acton Institute, which is that if you have markets, you will not benefit unless you have morality. That's the key insight. It's not good enough to get rich. There has to be a reason that has meaning, and that meaning actually must come from what's written on your heart, and what's written on your heart must come from the ordered nature of your morals. Now, again, the psychologists, the guys with the PhDs, as always, if they're speaking truth, they found something that people have known for thousands of years, right? In every religion, by the way. Ecclesiastes 5:10. Listen, whoever loves money never has enough. Isn't that for sure? Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with his income. This too is meaningless. You've heard these scriptures your whole life. This is borne out by the evidence, and we know it's true. So here's my real question at this point. Why? Why isn't this more obvious to us? Your priest taught you this. Your mother taught you this. Why is it that we always forget this truth and wind up loving our Mercedes? Why is that? And I have an answer for you. It's a conspiracy. It's true. You know, everybody thinks we right-wingers are full of conspiracy theories. It is a conspiracy. There's a conspiracy to keep you in the dark. There's a conspiracy to keep you ignorant of the equations of human happiness. We're being pushed toward more extrinsic goals by our society. And unless you pay attention, you're going to fall victim to this conspiracy. You're being told every single day, go for the fame, go for the notoriety, go for the money, buy my products, get more material things. You're being told this every single day. Don't believe it? Turn on the TV. Don't believe it? Go to the movies. Don't believe that there's a materialistic message about other people? Use people. It's okay. Go to a college campus. Listen to what the professors are telling their students about human sexuality. This is an attachment mentality based on amorality at best and immorality at worst. That's a conspiracy from Hollywood and Madison Avenue and newspapers and media and education. There's a conspiracy around us. Now, is it organized? No. But it's motivated by the very problems that it elicits. It's a vicious cycle. That's the cycle that we've got to break. And furthermore, you want to boil it down? You want to boil it down to the formula for the unhappy life on the basis of the conspiracy that surrounds us? Here it is. 4 words. Here's the basis of our unhappiness. The formula we get from Madison Avenue today. Love things, use people. That's it. Love things, use people. All day long. Step on somebody who's actually useful to you for your own satisfaction. Love the things around you. If you just buy this, you're going to be okay. Now, what do we need to do? That's conceptually simple, but it's practically really hard. Conceptually, you need to invert the vicious formula. You know it's true. You need to invert it because the real formula is not use people and love things. It's use things and love people. That's the goal. How do we do that? Actually, how do we do that every day? Because if we can do that, then we can turn markets as a force toward our morality. Then we can reorder our society. Then we can build a social movement. That's the goal. That's the question I had, the next question I had for the Swami. What do we do? Well, let me take a side note here just for a second. When I ask people why they're dissatisfied, they never say this. You know, and I taught at the university for a long, long time. And, I'd say to my, we talk about dissatisfaction with life because my main area of research is human happiness. And they would never say, the problem that we have is that we're using people and loving things. They never say that, right? They actually talk about the little irritations in life. And it's worth looking at this because there's an interesting body of research on the little things in life that actually do create dissatisfaction. There is a researcher, a psychologist at Princeton. He's an emeritus professor now, named Daniel Kahneman. If his name sounds familiar, it's because he's one of the only non-economists who have won the Nobel Prize in economics. Very brilliant. Daniel Kahneman, 15 years ago, had this brainstorm. He said, I wonder what makes people happy and unhappy from moment to moment throughout the day. And his hypothesis is that we don't actually know, because we blind ourselves to the things that are really giving us joy and unhappiness from moment to moment, the little and big things, the irritations, etc. So what he did, he had a research design. He got a grant, of course, from the government, and he basically used your money. And he bought 300 Palm Pilots, which are these little personal organizers. They're equivalent to doorstops today. But they were really relevant 15 years ago. He bought 300 of them, and he recruited 300 people into his experiment. He said, here's the deal. You get to keep this PDA. You get to keep this Palm Pilot, which was useful to them for like a month probably. He said, you get to keep this thing, but here's the deal. Over the next 2 weeks, every 15 minutes, it's going to go ding, and you got to pull it out. You got to write on it, what am I doing right now, and how happy or how unhappy am I, right? And he calculated on the basis of this data what makes you unhappiest in your day-to-day activities. All the regular day-to-day things that you do that make you unhappiest over the course of your day. He knows, he's ranked the top 10 things, and I know what they are too. And I'm going to see if you do. So what's the number one unhappiness-provoking thing that people do over the course of their day from day to day? What do you think it is? What do you think it is? Stuck in traffic. Now, to be sure, he was doing this in Princeton. So if he'd lived in Washington, D.C., that would probably be true. That would probably be true. Because let me tell you, it's a big source of bitterness in my life, right? And I come to Grand Rapids, and I'm going, man, I want to live here, But that actually in his survey was number 6. Traffic was number 6. Number one was spending time with your boss. So I'm the president of the American Enterprise Institute. I have 206 employees. And I used to think that when I would go into our cafeteria and sit down at the lunch table with my employees, that they were really happy to see me. And I was wrong. Good to know. Good to know. That survey decreased my happiness. But those are the day-to-day things that people know or people don't know. These are not the big philosophical things that create the arc of happiness or unhappiness in people's lives. The real problem that we face, identified by St. Paul and Ecclesiastes and Swami Gyan Muni and your mom, are the attachment to things. It's the extrinsic goals that we pursue. It's loving things instead of people. So how do we fix that? What do we do? Swami, what do we do? What do I do? Help me. He said, here's your real formula. Abundance without attachment. Seek abundance without attachment. So then the real question is, how do I do that? What are the practices? What do I do to improve my life? What do I teach my kids? How do I base my social movement? What am I going to do? Well, it turns out that we know what to do. There are 2 big practices that can lead us more to abundance without attachment. And this is what I'm telling my kids, but this is actually what I've learned myself. Practice number 1, abundance without attachment. Practice number 1. Are you attached to something? Give it away. Give it away. Charity is the best practice you can imagine. Detach yourself from your own abundance. Give it away. Years ago, I wrote a book called Who Really Cares, which was a book about charitable giving. I was a professor at Syracuse University at the time. It was a career-changing experience because my central finding that people paid a lot of attention to was that conservatives are more charitable, even to liberal charities, than liberals are. I found that liberals are really charitable with other people's money. Conservatives tend to be really charitable with their own money, is what I found. I mean, it was a very robust finding. It was very clear in the data, and I publicized that a little bit and found myself on Rush Limbaugh's show, and that I didn't really have that many friends in the faculty lounge anymore, it turns out. So, But one of that was not, for me, that was not the most profound finding that I got. I mean, that was just about politics. Who cares? Here was the big one that I found when I was doing research for that book. I kept finding that the more money people give away, the richer they get in subsequent years. And it was causal, according to my data. You give money away. Here's what I found. If you give away $1 this year, it will be causally related to $3.75 in income in the next year. Now, that can't be. I'm an economist. I mean, I didn't get my PhD learning that you give away all your money and suddenly you're rich. That's like magic or something. Forget that. So, I mean, it didn't make sense. It conflicted with my theory, my economic theory. And I did what all college professors do when data and theory conflict. I threw away my data. But it was stuck in my head. I couldn't get it out of my head. I mean, it was driving me crazy. And so I went finally to a colleague of mine who's a psychologist who did work in charitable giving, and I said, I'm finding that when people give more money away, they get richer. And he said, well, duh. We've been finding this for 30 years. What? But it's not, we haven't been looking at money. Money's boring. We've been looking at the real currency of people's lives, and that's happiness. When people give things that they hold dear away, they get happier later on. And he said, and of course they get richer because their stress levels fall and they become more effective and they're seen as leaders and they're lifted up. That's the reason. I mean, I said, it sounded like the hand of God. And he says, believe what you want, brother. You decide. I said, okay. And then it dawned on me that I should have been thinking this all along. Of course, when people are more generous, they become more effective. And when they become more effective, they become happier. And when they're happier, they become more prosperous. And then the whole world opened up to me. I found lots of literature that finds that people are not just happier, not just richer, they're healthier when they give money away. My favorite study along these lines, by the way, is a study that was published last year, actually in 2012, at the University of Liverpool. It was a study that basically said, the more you give, the better looking you are. Oh man, that's weird. So how did it work? So these guys showed up for an experiment at the University of Liverpool, and the researchers said you have to show up with your wife. Okay, men have to show up with their wife. Okay, and your one building says, here's the whole experiment. I need you to walk from this building over to that building over there, and we're going to interview you. But you got to walk slowly together over to that building. It's like, easy. They're walking with their wives, and there's an alleyway between the buildings. And out of the alleyway comes a hobo. And the hobo goes to the man and says, got any change? Okay. And the man had to decide. The man had a little change. He had to decide how much he was going to give him, et cetera. You got to the other building, a big sample. They got to the other building, and they interviewed the man and his wife. And first they said to the man, how much did you give the hobo? Then they asked the wife, how handsome do you find him right now? And they were looking at the correlation between the size of the gift to the hobo and the sexiness of the husband. And they found that the more change you give him, the more she likes you. So this is news you can use, guys. This is all relates back to one central organizing feature. Do you have something that's dear? Do you have something that you're attached to? Give it away. Give it away. The practice of detachment from the very source of your attachment will give you the sense that you're looking for of satisfaction. It is as clear as could be in the data. This is how you can be at war with the attachment that holds you down. That's number one. Number two, the second practice of abundance without attachment. Don't focus on the price of things. Focus on the value of experiences. What do I mean by that? There's an advertisement, a credit card advertisement. You've seen it before. It's very annoying, cloying, on all the time. But it's for MasterCard. And the MasterCard ads are worth pointing out because despite the fact that they're ubiquitous and they're hustling you, they have a very profound truth at the center of these ads. And so the ads are all about experiences that people are having. And there's one, for example, where a man is packing up the car to go to the beach with his son. And it starts listing the expenses that he has to do. He says, beach ball, $3. Gas for the car, $36. 2 nights in a hotel at the beach, $275. The weekend alone at the beach with my son. You all know it. You know what they're saying. It's not the price of the things, it's the value of the experiences that brings the life to life, that makes you fully alive. How can you be fully alive when you're buying things? You can't. You can only be fully alive when you're experiencing things. Now, it's funny. People come across these truths and don't realize what's happening all the time. Early in my marriage, 23 years ago, my wife and I we had no money, poor. And we were deciding, should we celebrate our anniversary by going away for 2 days? We lived in Florida at the time. Go to the Florida Keys for 2 days. Or should we buy a couch? Right? This was, and some of you, who've been married a long time, you remember the early days in your marriage and these conversations that you would have, right? And we decided to go to the Keys. Now, I'm a practical person, so I was arguing for the couch. And my wife Esther was arguing for the Keys, and she won because she always wins. And so we went to the Keys, and you know what? I actually thought the couch was permanent, and that the Keys vacation was evanescent. And that's exactly the opposite of the truth. The couch would have been long gone. I wouldn't remember the color. It would be in the dump by now. I'm still in the Keys. We're still there. I still remember the vacation. It was beautiful. It'll be with me forever. The truly evanescent thing is the material thing to which we become attached. The permanent thing is the intrinsic experience that comes from having time with somebody that you love. There are a lot of studies that show this. I'm not going to bore you with it because you know it's true. It's funny that there's back in the 1960s, Woody Allen had a stand-up routine in Las Vegas. Many people don't know he used to be a stand-up comedian before he made movies. And he had this one joke he used to tell that he really liked a lot. It was kind of along these lines. He said that in his first failed marriage, he said that he and his wife didn't have any money, and they were trying to decide whether or not, like me and my wife, to take a 2-week vacation to the Bahamas or use the same amount of money and get a divorce, right? And he says they talked about it, and they finally decided to get the divorce. He said, because, a 2-week vacation is over in 2 weeks, but a divorce is something you have forever, right? It's not exactly right, it turns out. He probably would have had the vacation just as long or longer. And again, the studies all support this, but I'll tell you how I finally learned this and how I was able to bring this home. I learned this from my son. I have 3 kids, and I have teenagers. Pity me. And my son Carlos, who's 14, when he was 9, 5 years ago, he came to me in November, October, and said, "Dad, I've been thinking about Christmas." I said, "That's good." And I was waiting for a long list of requests. And he said, "I've decided I don't want anything this year. All I want this year is to go fishing and hunting alone with you." Right? And I said, "Let's do it." And so what did we do? We went fishing and we went hunting, and we've done it every single year since. 4 weeks ago, between Christmas and New Year's, we were boar hog hunting in Central Florida. And then we spent a whole day light tackle fishing off Marco Island. How do I know that? How do I know? I can tell you every moment of that. It'll never leave. I can tell you everything we've shot and everything that we've caught for the past 5 Christmases. And if I'd bought him a scooter or a bike or something, it would have been gone and forgotten. I wouldn't remember a month later, and neither would Carlos. Carlos taught me of the value of intrinsic experiences over the price of extrinsic things. And each one of us can practice this. And when we do, we're militating against attachment, because what we're doing is bringing the life in life to us through the relationships that are more important. Now, these are the practices of attachment. But there's a little sleight of hand, my friends, which is that the formula was abundance without attachment. I went straight to attachment. Let's talk for a second about abundance. See, it's easy to do the sort of the Eastern routine of only talking about non-attachment, but you know perfectly that abundance matters too. So what about the Mercedes? How should we understand that? And the answer is, just like Swami Gyan told me, abundance is great. It's pulled millions of people out of poverty in his country. I want to talk about that for a second, because this is serious business. If you're going to build a better life for people, don't just understand non-attachment, you better understand abundance too. So how do we understand abundance? Well, this morning I had this wonderful opportunity to talk to the staff of Mackinac and Acton. We were talking about messaging, and I started off my remarks by talking about what brought me into the freedom movement. And I want to tell you, and it's abundance. But it's not love of stuff. It's not my relationship with my Mercedes, if I had one. Here's what it is. It's why abundance truly matters in this world. And it doesn't matter to you. I mean, it's okay. It doesn't matter to me, even though I grew up lower middle class. It matters to the people who can't be with us. It matters to the people who are poor in America and around the world. So let me tell you what abundance really looks like. Let me tell you about the work that's propagated morally by the Mackinac Center and the Acton Institute and the American Enterprise Institute, and how it actually has affected the world. What abundance has really done. That's what I shared with our friends this morning. As a child, I remember the first experience I had of true poverty, which was not just my neighbors on welfare, of which there were many. It was the picture in the National Geographic magazine when I was 6 or 7 years old of the kid from sub-Saharan belly who was suffering from malnutrition, who had flies on his face. You remember that picture? Remember when you first saw it? Remember how you felt as an American? You said, it's not right. It's not fair. But you couldn't do anything about it. I mean, look, maybe I'll grow up and be a missionary, Couldn't really do anything about it. You could offer up prayers, which I did and you did, and you could offer up alms for the poor, which I did and you did, but you knew it was drops in the ocean. You knew that was not creating a system, that was not creating a better world. You knew, and the point of that picture was that this boy is going to die and you can do nothing about it. It was to create a sense of desperation and impotence on your part, as a matter of fact. So, what happened to him? You grew up, I grew up, we went to school, we got married, we pursued our lives, and something happened to that boy too. Not that boy, I don't know. What happened to the world was that it changed. If you ask Americans, how has the world changed? 70% of Americans say it's gotten worse. 70% of Americans say hunger's gotten worse. And they're wrong. They're wrong. Economists like me, we measure starvation level poverty by $1 a day in income, or $1.25 a day, or $2 a day or something. That's how we measure poverty. The percentage of the world's population living on $1 a day since I was a child has decreased by 80%. An 80% decline. Most of you didn't know that. Most people in the United States don't know that. Now, what are you going to do with that information? You better use it. Why? Because that is the first truly massive worldwide anti-poverty achievement in the history of mankind, and it happened in our lifetimes, our adult lifetimes. That has happened recently. 650 million Chinese have been pulled out of starvation level poverty since 1980 alone. That has happened, and has never happened before, ever. Literally, somebody's not going to bed hungry tonight who would have. Somebody's going to school who wouldn't have. So you got to ask why, because if you don't ask why, you can't replicate it. Okay, is it the fabulous success of the United Nations? That's like, in Grand Rapids, that's a laugh line, right? In Washington, people are like, yep, that's it, right? Is it the International Monetary Fund or the global, the global central planning system? Is it monetary policy? Is it the World Bank? Is it socialism? No. I'll tell you what it is. Globalization, free trade, property rights, the rule of law, and entrepreneurship. It was you and your values and your work, your American free enterprise system that has lifted the whole world up for the first time in human history. And you didn't even know it. You have a system that's working while you sleep. That is a profound moral good. That is abundance in action for the salvation of our human brothers and sisters, at least at the material level. And that is something we got to fight for. And you know why? Because it's under attack. Believe me, in Washington, D.C., the place is crawling with people that don't believe this, the people that don't understand this, the people who are hostile to these values, and consequently who are warriors against human development among the poorest brothers and sisters around the world. If you agree with me that we are commanded to seek the betterment of the least of these, our brothers and sisters, you must fight for a system that makes it so. There is no other way. And the only system that's ever made it so is your American free enterprise system, pushed all the way down to the bottom and defended morally. Because if you don't, believe me, it will recede here. And when it recedes here, your taxes will go up and you'll be a little poorer. Who cares? It will recede around the world. And that little boy won't make it. That's the stakes. Those are the stakes. That's what abundance means. So, my friends, you need to be in the business of abundance and in the business of non-attachment. And I have 2 assignments for you. Number 1, fight for an economic system that creates the most abundance, remembering who needs it the most, which is people who are not here today. Number 2, fight for the private moral values to enjoy the fruits of this system in an ordered way. Those are the assignments. If we want a better world for everybody, we have to work for free enterprise with human consciousness. We need to work for material prosperity with the wisdom to be detached from that prosperity. Now, you go around talking like this, and people are going to say, what are you, hanging out in a yoga studio? What is this new age stuff? This is a new movement. This is a new movement. This is not right wing and this is not left wing. This is truth. This is based on what's written on our hearts. We have the opportunity to lift up the world by creating a social movement that does these things for people who are poorer than we are, at the same time propagating the values that will bring back the satisfaction that you and I and our kids and grandkids deserve, to be the leader nation in the world and to be a moral beacon for freedom and for everybody. If we are not satisfied with being the greatest country in the world, we will not spread these values with cultural confidence. We must bring satisfaction to more people. We must bring more abundance to others. That's the moral story that we face today. We can be the force for a better world by remembering the formula and by putting it into action. And for your support for these great organizations, for your work for these values, and for coming here today, my only words to you are, God bless you, and thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike.
Very much, Arthur. We do have ample time for questions, so if you'd like to ask one, the microphone works really well, and the only thing to make it work well is to hold it pretty close to your mouth, so if you could do that.
Swami, money doesn't just mean material things, it also means security. To me, if I'm greeting people at the door of Walmart at age 81, I want it to be because I want to and not because I have to. Yeah. That makes me attached to my 401k, et cetera. Could you address that, the difference between money as security and money as stuff?
Sure. I mean, the truth of the matter is that being financially secure as a senior citizen is not the same thing as loving your Mercedes. It's basically making sure that you don't have to work yourself into the ground, working until you're actually dead. People deserve to be able to enjoy it, particularly in a very, very rich country, to enjoy their old age a little bit more. I believe that as a cultural imperative, we should be able to stand up for these things, not confusing paying your rent with the love for your Mercedes. That's a public policy decision that's based on our belief that senior citizens deserve to have some sort of a pension. And that, incidentally, what does that mean? How do you achieve that? Because I agree, it's got to happen. So how do you achieve it? Well, let's look at how you make sure that doesn't happen. What are you going to do to make sure that doesn't happen? Now, if you're in my business, running a think tank and being an economist, you're talking about entitlements. Right? Entitlement programs. We have 3 entitlements in America that are going bankrupt: Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Right? Sound like George W. Bush. Social Security. Right? They it's one word. Right? And okay, so what do you have to do to make sure that these things don't go bust? Because you don't want them to go bust because you have a moral imperative to make sure that people have enough income security that they deserve, that we have decided that they deserve. What are you going to do? Answer, not what we're doing now. Right now, we are in the business of imperiling every senior citizen who relies on Social Security, every senior citizen who requires Medicare to maintain have adequate health care, and every poor person who relies on Medicaid. How are we doing that? We are doing that with fiscal profligacy. Let's get to money just for a second. If you want to figure out, if you would join me in believing that a safety net through these programs and welfare programs too are something that we have to declare peace on and be all about protecting. And I very strongly believe that we need a social safety net for the most indigent citizens with work, but we need a social safety net. How are you going to protect those things? And the answer is by not becoming insolvent. How are you going to avoid insolvency? By being a fiscal conservative. If you love the poor and you love senior citizens, you must be a fiscal conservative. There's no other way. That's a fact. How do I know? Well, I'm going to Spain next week to talk to the finance minister. And he wants to know my opinion, which is really weird, right? And you spend 10% more than your GDP and you pass it out to middle-class people for a decade. That's how you do it. It's party time. And then guess what? And then homelessness will increase by a factor of 3. And then you'll make sure that the public health system is inadequate. Then you'll actually see old people who are poor and having to take minimum wage jobs when you know in your heart they shouldn't have to do it. If you love the poor, you must be a fiscal conservative. No other way.
In your
Buzz, my friend Buzz.
yeah, thank you. God gave us the tithe, and He gave it to us for both the rich and the poor, so that we would have this unattachment. In your book, Who Really Cares, you talked about that when somebody was, say, earning, the poor making $25,000 or so, how that group who worked for it gave a very high percentage, if they were Christian and so forth, some of your categories, gave a very high percentage of their meager income to charity. And you also talked about the equivalent of people on welfare that got exactly as much money and how they gave absolutely nothing away. Can you explain the consequences for both those actions?
Sure. The truth. So Buzz correctly identifies a pattern that we see over and over again, which is the most charitable group in American society are the working poor. The most charitable group. Now, again, we don't know this. The most uncharitable group in American society, not the rich, they're the second most charitable, or the rich. The most uncharitable are the non-working poor. So people have equivalent incomes but didn't earn them. Okay, now, I'm not making a moral statement. I'm simply informing you of what the patterns in the data are and always have been in this country. Why is that? That's when it gets really interesting. What's the difference between the working and the non-working poor? And it's the sanctification of work. It's the sense of obligation to be part of society and the privilege to do so. If you want to take away human dignity, you know how to do it? You take away the job. That's the single best way to do it. And I'll give you a really good way to destroy dignity. You want the best way to do it? I'm going to price you out of the market. Now, why? Because you're in a dead-end job anyway, man. It's classic. You know, I heard the vice president of the United States on The View. Oh, man. I mean, and now you're thinking, like, he's watching The View? No. I saw it on YouTube. So it's like, I have to watch it. It's my job. So, and Vice President Biden, he's talking about, you know, we need to implement these policies so that people aren't stuck in dead-end jobs. The vice president thinks that somebody who trims hedges is in a dead-end job. I bet he doesn't think that a guy who has a hedge fund is in a dead-end job. Why? Because one guy's making very little money and the other guy's getting rich. Why? Because he's a materialist. That's why. Because he's under the tyranny of attachment. Anybody who says that any other job is a dead-end job simply doesn't understand the sanctification of ordinary work. That's the problem. Okay, so what's the lesson? For you and me, Buzz, and for everybody else who actually shares our basic point of view, don't fall into that trap. Never let those words pass your lips, because there is no such thing as a dead-end job. There's dead in government, there's dead in politics, there's dead in policy, no dead-end jobs. Every job can and should be a sanctified gift, something that actually does indeed put us in the image of our Creator, who is inherently generative and inherently creative. The key thing then is not price them out of the market, give them a healthcare system that dumps their hours down to 29, which is happening under Obamacare, or making sure that we destroy 500,000 low-wage jobs, disproportionately minority communities, which will happen when we increase the minimum wage to $10.10 an hour. It's having public policies that match our values, which is that everybody gets to work, and if you work hard and play by the rules, you should be able to support yourself. We have real policies that do that. Earned income tax credit, really fancy stuff, right? Basically, you know what it is? It's a wage subsidy, where tax dollars actually will flow through, either through a tax credit from the government or through the employer in the check, saying if you work hard, have continuous full-time employment, we will subsidize your wage up to a particular amount. I know it's expensive. I know. That's what I want my government to do. I don't want all the dumb boondoggles and crazy schemes that are flowing into the pocket of corporate cronies and right into the public sector unions. That's the stuff I want to get rid of. I want things that actually make work pay. And we know how to do it, Buzz. Because then when we do it, then we will see the difference between sanctified ordinary work as a society and one that actually says that welfare checks are every bit as good as paychecks. That will flow through not just to charitable giving differences. Those will flow through to parenting differences and crime and moral differences up one side and down the other. We have to build the society that we want. Who's next?
Arthur. Right in front. Right down here.
Oh, hey.
Yeah.
The speaker's over there, so I'm looking at the speaker. Right? So I'm like my dog, you know? Yeah.
I can relate. Oftentimes in discussions about these economic principles and approaches, we hear snide comments about the so-called trickle-down theory of economics. How would you respond to those attacks?
Well, these attacks, these are tricky, and part of it is the last assault we had on the concept of trickle-down economics came from the Holy Father, came from Pope Francis in his apostolic letter to the faithful last year. Trickle-down economics is the basic idea, as you all know, that when you have a prosperous society and the prosperity actually goes to the people at the top, that it will tend through generally the stimulation of demand in the economy down to lower tiers of the economy. The truth is, it doesn't always work. How does it not work? It won't work when you have public policies making it impossible for poor people to get credit when rich people do. Why would we have that? Because of the bailouts, because of the macroeconomic policies that have been pursued by the Obama administration that are in direct militancy against the concept of trickling down to the poor. And then they have the nerve to say it doesn't work. It's not working because of them, among other things. You can wreck trickle-down economics when you have crony capitalism. Crony capitalism is abundant in Washington, D.C., around the corner from my office. K Street. It's sickening. It's pigs at the trough. It's corporate lobbyists and lawyers and specially wired people. Keep it for themselves. People who have these relationships, not on the basis of merit, not on the basis of competition, but on the basis of special relationships with politicians. That's how you do it. You have a corrupt culture that says, I have winners and losers, not based on competition, and you have public policies that make it impossible for people at the bottom to rise. Then trickle-down economics doesn't work. So here's what we need to be for. Not just the concept of trickle-down economics, but the mechanisms that share it truly with other people. And that means we have to be dedicated to free enterprise, not for the rich, free enterprise for the poor. What are we doing to make free enterprise more abundant for poor people? What are we doing to make entrepreneurship something that's more evident in the lives of the poor? And if we don't have an answer for that, we shouldn't call ourselves free enterprise advocates and political conservatives, because we're not doing the job that we need to do to save the country. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi, Arthur. Thanks for coming down here again. Question having to do with the opposition to, in some corners, the opposition to broad-based systems that do increase the positivity of outcomes. Obviously, we've discussed the issue on the left, where you've got the tendency for a certain proportion of the population to embrace a social democratic view. But is there an issue that that you or other scholars at the AEI have observed, perhaps with the more Randian right, and a disengagement with the idea that we should take care of the poor or have systems that set up that social safety net?
So it has been a very destructive development over the past 50 years that a lot of intellectuals on the right are hostile to safety nets per se. Now, reasonable people can disagree on how abundant safety nets should be and what cutoff should be and what the requirements for safety nets should be. But the truth of the matter is that is very unusual thinking. If you go back to the most iconic intellectual economic thinker of the 20th century was Friedrich Hayek. He wrote his canonical book, The Road to Serfdom. Really was influential in the conservative movement. If you haven't read The Road to Serfdom, you gotta read it. It's a page turner. Well, all right, but it's a great book. What did he say that the job of government is? Mind you, this is a libertarian icon. He said that the government's got two jobs. One is, when cost effective and possible, to rectify market failures. Markets don't always work. There's crime, there's pollution, there is the need for public goods like the army and firefighters, there is monopoly. These are cases where the markets fail, number one. Number two is a safety net for the most indigent citizens. That's from the most influential right-wing economists of the 20th century. Yet somehow, in this rarefied air of the conservative intellectual movement, people have said, no. We actually, through pure capitalism, can support the poorest citizens who actually cannot, for whatever reason, starting, by the way, with a monopolized, terrible education system that the Mackinac Center is fighting every single day. For whatever reason, they can't actually make it productively in the market economy. Who are we? Come on. My view is that the most important innovation that's been instantiated by the free enterprise system is the ability to create a safety net. In the real world, people take advantage, but we have to have systems that actually knock down the incentives, that actually make it. And here's how we do it, by the way. We should have a safety net for people only who are truly indigent, with a requirement for work for every dollar. Then we bless people twice. Then we actually get around the malincentives. Then we stop destroying lives through dependency. Then we can actually understand the nature of the problem. But when the conservative intellectual movement doesn't recognize what Friedrich Hayek recognized, then we're actually contradicting, I think, the right emotional and moral stance of 90% of the population. Then we become a remnant. Follow up.
Yeah, just to follow that up, then, so you mentioned the EITC as a stopgap
Yep.
measure for that. Do you have an opinion with regard to a minimum basic income or some sort of thing administered, say, through the IRS?
So minimum basic income is something that we're just making sure that everybody has a certain amount that's guaranteed by the government. That's been an idea that's going around from libertarian economists for a long time. It's highly imperfect. And one of the reasons it's highly imperfect is unless you have the same cultural inputs, you're going to get suboptimal activities. And so what we need is that's great if you actually believe that people will sustain themselves and their families in the same kind of productive way. One of my colleagues, the guy who runs our poverty programs at AEI, is a fellow named Robert Doar. If his name sounds familiar, it's because he's the son of John Doar, who was the only Republican in the Johnson administration. He was the deputy to Robert Kennedy, as a matter of fact, in the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. Robert Doar, the son, works for me now, was the welfare commissioner for New York City under Mayor Bloomberg. While poverty fell, he cut cash assistance from 1.3 million New Yorkers to 350,000. This is while child poverty and adult poverty were actually falling. By the way, it's on its way back up, as are cash payments. Homelessness is up, poverty is up, spending are up. What are the odds? Under de Blasio, what are the odds, right? Robert Doar understands that every dollar in welfare must come with an obligation for work, and that people actually require services over cash in many cases until people culturally are on their feet. Now, I don't want that to be true. I mean, I know all the models that say that cash is more efficient. I got it. But I also live in the world and put one foot in front of the other. And I understand that. It's funny, you know, let me take it to one practical level before we move on to the next question, okay? One practical level. What do you give to the hobo on the street? Remember that experiment from the University of Liverpool? What should you actually do to the hobo on the street? Now, here's the truth, because I've studied this. Here's the truth. If you give him money, you're giving him dope. That's what you're doing. Do not give him money. But, okay, so my wife and I have this argument all the time, because my wife, who's a daily communicant, my wife says, when I see his face, that's the face of our Savior. How am I going to argue with that? Matthew 25:40, right? I mean, come on. It's like, no, it's not. I mean, come on, right? It's like, forget all the corporal acts of mercy. Forget them all, right? So what are you going to do? The answer is you're going to give. What are you going to give? Food. Right? I mean, our car is full of food. We stop at an intersection, it's like, on the car. One time my wife gave a homeless guy a whole pie. Right? It's like, and he's looking at it like, that's a whole pie. Yeah. So you have to answer these things, and that's exactly it's a corollary to the exact question that you asked. What are you going to do to serve the basic obligations of your morality while actually not making the social problem worse? And that's what we have to come to terms with as people with a heart in this place. Yes, yes, ma'am. We got it. Let's wait for the. Oh, sorry. We'll come here next, ma'am. Yeah. Mike is running this. I'm working for Mike, so that's right.
Hi, Arthur.
Hi, David.
I don't have much in common with the president, but one thing I do admire is that he is always on offense. And so that leads me to, I guess, a two-part question for you. Is there anything you see now that the Senate has changed hands that you're optimistic about happening that may not have had a chance to happen in the past 4 years? And also, is there anybody you see on the free enterprise side of things that could actually go out there and play offense?
Yeah. I'm more optimistic than I've been in years. That doesn't mean I'm optimistic. I'm just more optimistic than I've been in years, right? Like, yeah, no, Republicans, they won't screw it up, right? But I am more optimistic than I've been in years. Why? Because they're actually talking differently than I've heard in a long time. Look, we've been working on this so hard. If AEI is doing its job, by the way, me and my 200 colleagues, if we're doing it, you know how you're going to know? Because the voices out of Washington are all going to be talking about poverty. That's what you're going to hear. That's when you know that we're actually in there. And they're going to be talking about the other things that we've been caring about for the longest time, from tax reform to education reform to healthcare reform to an actual foreign policy for once. Imagine these things, right? But the key thing is if they're actually talking, if they're stealing the language and icons of the left, you're going to know we were there. That's how you're going to know. And I hear it all the time. I mean, I was, what a privilege. I addressed the assembled House and Senate Republicans all in one room 2 weeks ago at their retreat in Hershey, Pennsylvania. Weird, you know? I mean, right before me was Jay Leno, and right after me was Tony Blair. And I'm thinking, you think I'm a has-been too? So, it's like, you know how Republicans are. They're like, how come we can't get Johnny Carson? Right? Because he's dead, you know? So what? What's your point, right? So, but this is what we talked about. I mean, look, I could have gone and talked about tax reform. That's my area as a public finance economist. No, we were talking about what it means to fight for people instead of fighting against things, because then you're on offense. You like Obama because he's on offense. He's actually not completely on offense because he's attacking you all the time, right? If he were really on offense, he would be fighting for someone constantly. That's what the offense does. Newt Gingrich taught that to me. I asked Newt Gingrich one time, what did you learn after the 1994 revolution? What was your biggest problem after the 1994 revolution, right? Because that's really interesting. It was a business professor. You don't want to know what did you do right. Tell me what you did wrong. What was the problem? He said it was the Republicans. They were acting like the opposition still. They didn't understand that they were having the majority, and they weren't acting like the majority. I said, what do you mean? Well, in a democratic system, the minority is also known as the opposition. The opposition opposes What do you do to oppose? You fight against somebody else's ideas. You fight against things. If you're in the majority, you fight for people. Then people say, oh, that's the majority. And if you're, let's say you're a 40% candidate, you want to look to everybody like the 60% candidate, start fighting for people. Stop fighting against things. That's what, that was a profound truth that Newt told me. And that's what I'm seeing Republicans starting to do. Don't fight against Obamacare. No. Fight for the victims of Obamacare. We're having their hours cut to 29. They're losing their physicians. And they're actually about millions of them are about to pay a penalty to the IRS, the much regretted IRS. Fight for them. You don't fight against teachers union. That's boring. Fight for students, especially poor kids who are being marginalized in a system that has the same basic innovation and technology since of the 1950s, because we're protecting adults instead of helping children. That's what we do, and actually that's the language that we're starting to see. If all of you want to encourage that when you're talking to your congressman, when you're talking to your senator, when you're talking to your governor, encourage him or her along these lines to start talking like the majority, going on offense, and in so doing, fighting for the people that need him or her the very most. We got one, and then we'll come back over here, ma'am, because I promised you, so we'll go back in the center after that, okay? Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm just curious, your thoughts, love people and use things, and I'm fascinated by your 80% abundance statistic, and I don't think I got it all right, but the globalization and the free enterprise system that's been working. How do you see, with the transfer of wealth from our parents' generation to our generation, affecting that 80%? And how do you see the wealth then that gets transferred in the future from us to our kids? How does that get impacted? Especially if you did sort of grow up with the abundance is in people and loving people and using things. I'm afraid that we perhaps have raised children who vie for every possible student grant they can get from the government and sort of have this, I had to sign up for Obamacare, so I guess I'm used to it now thing that's so drastically different from what our parents.
Yep, that's a good point, and let me add to your worries. Europe, which is a post-Christian continent at this point. Europe, the average American gives 12 times more to charity per capita than the average Italian. Now, does that mean the Italians have never given? To a certain extent, yes. But the biggest problem that you have is a cultural shift from private life to socialism, from a reliance on family and community to a reliance on the government. This is what social democracy gets you. It's a change in culture. It's a belief that somehow you do deserve this benefit that comes from the anonymous state. That's not an economic change. The economic change doesn't matter. It's the cultural change that really matters. Are we doing that in America? Well, yes. We are doing that in America. Look at actually the circumstances that young people face today. Now, all of us have a responsibility and an opportunity to train our kids not to have these cultural values, but in point of fact, this is what we're trying to do. Look at everything we're doing down the line. I mean, I think higher education is really super important. I mean, it was the big driver in my life. I finished my bachelor's degree when I was 30 by correspondence because I was bumming around as a musician all the way through my 20s. And if I hadn't been able to get my bachelor's degree, I wouldn't be able to be in front of you today. My life would have been completely different. My life wouldn't have been as good. I'm a big believer in in higher education, but I'm not in favor of this community college policy that we've got from the president. Why? Because instead of trying to fix a lousy secondary education system, instead of making a system that's ruinously expensive and doesn't prepare poor people to actually have any job that matches the current economy in high school, instead of doing that, we're going to spend more money and make sure that everybody has to stay in school for free for 2 years longer. What's the point? The point is to make more people reliant on the government and to put more of the private sector GDP under the aegis of the federal government and to socialize more and to become more of a social democracy and redistribute more income. That's what we're doing, and that's the point of what we're trying to do here. And when you do that, you will change the economy, but that's not the problem. You will change the culture, and then we'll get the problems exactly that you identify.
Unfortunately, this is going to be the last question, so ma'am,
Well, I hope it's worth it then.
We'll vote later.
Okay. From the time I was 20 and I got my first job teaching in the inner city in Detroit, and every student in that school was either welfare or ADC, I have believed that it is important to connect that money with some kind of work, as you have mentioned. But how do you create those jobs without increasing government that most conservatives want to make smaller?
It's a good question. How do you, first, I guess the question to begin with is, what's more expensive, welfare with work or welfare with no work? And the answer is welfare with work is more expensive than giving people checks. The most efficient way is to, in the short term, is to make sure that people simply have enough to sustain themselves. Now, what does that mean? You got two choices. Look, there are two kinds of people out there. People want welfare with work and people want welfare with no work. There are very few people who want no welfare. That's very unusual, right? I mean, it's like people with PhDs. But, humans don't think this. Okay, so, all right. Basically, what set of ideologies does this betray? This is basically the dichotomy between two kinds of people out there. People who believe that work is a blessing and people who believe that work is a punishment. Also known as people who believe that the poor are assets to develop, or people who believe that the poor are liabilities to manage. You got to decide which it is. If you believe that people are liabilities to manage, you'll do what companies do when they have liabilities that they can't get off their books. See, the problem with America is all these poor people. We can't get these liabilities off our books, right? So what are we going to do? We're going to manage them. We're going to manage them as efficiently as we possibly can so they're not living on the streets, and we can kind of satisfy Americans that we're taking care of them, but as cheaply as possible. That means cutting checks. Maybe, on the other hand, we believe that the poor are assets to develop. What does a company do when it develops assets? The answer is it invests in them. That is more expensive in the short run, but it's morally right, and it comes out in the black in the long run. That's what I want to do. I know, but look, I got the data on the welfare reforms of 1996, and let me tell you, that was a success. That was the most important public policy innovation in the lives of the poor in the last 60 years. And all the work requirements are trying to be rolled back by the Obama administration as we speak. Work for welfare is expensive in the short run. It's a smart investment in the long run because it treats the poor as assets to develop, which is actually how we see the world. That was a great last question. Thank you to all of you.